People in this town still talk about what happened at Millbrook Elementary on that Thursday afternoon in November. Some of them think I should have handled it differently. Some of them think I was too quiet for too long. But not one single person who knows the full story has ever said I was wrong for what I did when my daughter pressed play on that recording. I want to tell you everything, from the beginning, because the ending only makes sense if you understand how we got there. It started the way a lot of things start, with a smile that didn't reach someone's eyes. I was sitting across from my daughter's teacher, Ms. Renata Bloom, in a classroom decorated with construction paper leaves and laminated alphabet charts, and she was explaining to me, in the patient tone people use with children and other people they consider beneath them, that my daughter Chloe was simply not performing at the expected level. The parent-teacher conference had been my idea. I had requested it 3 weeks earlier after Chloe came home with a failing grade on a math assessment that I absolutely knew, she had prepared for. Ms. Bloom folded her hands on the desk between us and said those words, "Your daughter is just not smart enough for this level," with the kind of certainty that told me she had said them before and had never once been challenged on them. Chloe was sitting 2 chairs to my left. She is 9 years old with her father's dark eyes and my stubbornness, and she did not cry when she heard that. She reached into the pocket of her jacket, the navy one with the white stripe on the sleeve, and pulled out her phone. She had asked me for that phone 8 months ago, and I had said yes partly because I travel occasionally for work and I wanted her to be able to reach me. She pressed play, and what came out of that speaker changed everything. Let me tell you how we got here. I have been a property manager for the better part of 11 years. I work for a firm called Aldridge Property Group, and I oversee a portfolio of residential and small commercial properties across 3 counties. It is not glamorous work. It involves a lot of phone calls about broken boilers and lease renewals and tenants who pay on the 14th when rent was due on the 1st. But I am very good at it, and 4 years ago the firm's founding partner, Gerald Aldridge, brought me in as a partial equity partner in exchange for taking over the operational management of 7 additional properties he had inherited from his late brother. My name is now on 11 deeds as a co-owner. I do not talk about this at school events or neighborhood gatherings. Not because I am ashamed of it, but because I learned a long time ago that the moment people know what you have, they start trying to decide what you deserve. Chloe's father and I separated when she was 3. It was mutual in the way that most separations are mutual, meaning neither of us wanted to be the one to say it first, but we both knew it was coming. Derek is a decent man. He lives 40 minutes away, he has Chloe every other weekend, and he pays his support on time every month without being asked twice. We are not friends exactly, but we are functional, which I think is the best you can hope for when a marriage ends and a child stays. Chloe lives with me. She has lived with me her entire life, in the house I bought 6 years ago in the Wren Park neighborhood, a 2-bedroom craftsman on a corner lot that I refinanced 2 years ago at a much better rate after the property values in the area increased substantially. That house is mine. Everything in it is mine. I built it from the inside out, slowly and deliberately, the way you build anything that's supposed to last. Chloe started 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary in September. She had gone to the same school since kindergarten, and she knew the building like the back of her hand, which locker room door stuck, which water fountain ran cold, which lunch table was nearest the window. She is a social child, easy with people, the kind of kid who remembers your birthday and asks about your grandmother. She is also smart, not in the way that gets celebrated in newsletters, but in the quiet, persistent way that shows up in how she approaches problems. She reads above her grade level. She does mental math faster than I do sometimes. She is curious in the way that makes teachers either love you or find you exhausting, because she asks follow-up questions. Ms. Renata Bloom fell into the second category. I figured that out by October. The first sign was a paper Chloe brought home with a C- on it. She had written a paragraph about a book the class had read, and the feedback at the top said the response lacked depth and critical thinking. Chloe read that comment 3 times. Then she looked at me and said, "Mom, what does critical thinking mean?" I explained it to her. She thought about it. Then she said, "I thought that's what I did." I took a picture of that paper. I don't know why exactly, instinct maybe. The same instinct that makes you screenshot a text before you decide whether to respond. The second sign was what happened during the October open house. I was standing near the reading corner, looking at the student work pinned to the display board, and I noticed that Chloe's work was not up there. Every other student in the class had something displayed. 3 children had 2 pieces up. Chloe had nothing. I found Ms. Bloom near the supply closet and asked, very pleasantly, why Chloe's work wasn't included. Ms. Bloom said, with that same patient smile, that she only displayed work that demonstrated exceptional understanding and that she hadn't seen that from Chloe yet this term. I nodded, I thanked her. I went home that night and opened a notebook and wrote down the date, the time, what was said, and who was standing close enough to have heard it. That notebook became important later. If you have ever been counted out by someone who was supposed to help you grow, you know exactly what that silence feels like. Not the silence of giving up, the silence of deciding. The third sign was the most direct. In late October, Chloe came home and told me that Ms. Bloom had moved her to the lower reading group. Not because of a test, not because of an assessment, she had simply moved her. When I asked Chloe what Ms. Bloom had said about why, Chloe shrugged and said, "She said it would be better for me." I wrote that down too. I want to be clear about something. I am not the kind of parent who thinks her child can do no wrong. I know Chloe's limitations. I know she gets distracted when she's bored. I know she rushes through assignments she finds too easy. I know she is 9 years old and 9-year-olds are, by definition, works in progress. But I also knew, with the particular certainty that comes from 11 years of reading people's intentions through their behavior, that something about this situation was not right. Ms. Bloom was not struggling to reach Chloe. She had decided something about Chloe and was working backward from that decision. I called the school office in early November and requested a formal parent-teacher conference. The secretary told me Ms. Bloom had openings the following Thursday at 4 in the afternoon. I said that worked perfectly. In the 2 weeks between that call and the conference, I did two things. The first was that I contacted an education consultant named Miriam Osaibansu, who I had been referred to by another parent at the school. Miriam had spent 16 years in school administration before going independent, and she did advocacy work for families who felt their children were being academically misclassified. We met at a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning, Miriam with a yellow legal pad, me with my notebook. I walked her through everything I had documented. She reviewed it carefully, asked questions, made notes. Then she told me that what I was describing fit a pattern she had seen before, a teacher who made early term assessments based on factors that had nothing to do with academic performance, and then built a paper trail to justify them retroactively. She said that if I could gather direct evidence of differential grading or differential treatment, the district's academic equity policy gave me a clear pathway to a formal grievance that would go above the school principal directly to the district superintendent's office. I wrote that down. The second thing I did was something Chloe came up with herself. It was a Sunday. I was in the kitchen making her lunch, and she was at the kitchen table doing homework. She had her phone sitting next to her because she'd been listening to a playlist. She looked up and said, "Mom, can you record someone talking if they don't know you're doing it?" I turned around. I said, "Why are you asking that?" She said, and this is exactly what she said because I will never forget the matter-of-fact tone she used. Because I want to remember what Ms. Bloom says when she's on the phone. She says different stuff than when the parents are there. I stood very still for a moment. Chloe is 9. She had noticed something that I had only suspected. She had watched her teacher behave one way in front of families, and another way when she thought no one was paying attention, and she had arrived at the entirely logical conclusion that someone should document it. I explained to her that in our state, recording a conversation in a place where there's no expectation of privacy, like a classroom or a hallway, was generally permitted, especially for someone who was lawfully present in that space. I want to be careful here. I am not a lawyer, and I told Chloe that too. But I also knew enough about the general framework from the property management work I do, which sometimes involves disputes over recorded conversations, to understand that this was legally distinct from wiretapping a private call. I told her that if she wanted to use her phone to record what she heard, she should be in a place she was allowed to be, not somewhere she'd been excluded from. She nodded like this was completely obvious information she had merely needed confirmed. She started recording the following Tuesday. I did not tell her what to listen for. I did not coach her. I told her to go to school, pay attention, and to come home and tell me what her day was like, the same as I always did. She went to school on Tuesday, the 12th of November, with her phone in her jacket pocket and the voice memo app set to record. She came home that afternoon quieter than usual. She ate her snack. She finished her homework. At 8 o'clock, when I came into her room to say goodnight, she handed me the phone. She said, "I think you should hear this, Mom." I sat on the edge of her bed and put in one earbud. I pressed play. In the 15 days between that Tuesday and the parent-teacher conference, I made two calls that I did not mention to anyone. The first was to a woman named Catherine Delacroix, an attorney with a firm that handles civil rights and education law cases. I had been given her name by Miriam Osaibansu, who told me Catherine was the person you called when a school district needed to be made to understand something formal was coming. We spoke for 40 minutes on a Thursday afternoon. I did not tell Catherine everything I had yet. I told her enough. She told me that what I had was significant, that the specific language captured in the recording raised questions about equal treatment under district policy, and that she would like to be present, or at least reachable by phone, during the parent teacher conference. We agreed I would call her the morning of the conference to confirm. The second call was to the district's family advocacy line, a number listed on the back of the parent handbook that I suspect very few people have ever used. I did not file a formal complaint. I simply called and asked a general question about the process for filing an academic equity grievance. The person on the line, a man named Roy, walked me through the steps. He told me that documented evidence of differential grading, or differential commentary, about a student's academic capacity, especially if the commentary appeared to be based on factors outside academic performance, was exactly the kind of thing the Equity Office was designed to address. He gave me the name of the Equity Coordinator for our district, a woman named Sandra Fuentesware, and told me her office was on the third floor of the district administration building. I wrote down Sandra Fuentesware's name, title, direct phone number, and office location. Then I went to pick up Chloe from her after school program, and I took her to get frozen yogurt, and she told me about a book she was reading about deep sea creatures, and I listened to every word of it. That is the part nobody sees in these stories, the part where you are carrying something enormous and also just being someone's parent at the same time. I had a college fund for Chloe. I had opened a 529 account for her when she was 14 months old, and I had been contributing to it every month since, automatically, the way you set something up when you believe the future exists. By November of this year, it had grown to $67,000. I thought about that number sometimes when I was sitting in school meetings, looking at teachers who had decided what kind of student my daughter was based on something I couldn't quite name. $67,000 sitting quietly in an account, waiting for a future that I was building even while other people were trying to narrow it. The Thursday of the conference, I dressed practically. Dark slacks, a gray blouse, flat shoes. I brought my notebook. I brought a copy of the recording transferred to my phone, and a second copy saved to a secure cloud folder. I had texted Catherine Delacroix at 8 that morning, and she had responded, "Ready? Call me the moment you need me." Chloe's after-school teacher, a kind young man named James, was going to keep her until 5:15. I had told Chloe that morning that I was going to talk to Ms. Bloom and that everything was going to be okay. Chloe had looked at me over her cereal bowl and said, "I know, Mom." Then she ate her cereal. I drove to Millbrook Elementary and parked in the visitor lot. I sat in the car for 4 minutes, not because I was afraid. Because I wanted to be absolutely certain that, when I walked into that classroom, every single thing I intended to say and do was in exactly the right order. The look on Ms. Renata Bloom's face when she saw me walk through the door was the look of someone who expected this to go a particular way. She had the small classroom arranged with two chairs facing her desk, as if she were the authority in a proceeding she controlled. She had a manila folder open with what I assumed were Chloe's assessments. She had a cup of tea. She was comfortable. She had absolutely no idea what was sitting in my jacket pocket. I sat down. I put my notebook on my knee. I smiled the way I smile when I am in a negotiation and I need the other person to keep talking. "Thank you for meeting with me," I said. She folded her hands in that familiar way. "Of course, I'm glad you reached out. I think it's important for us to be on the same page about Chloe's situation." I said nothing. I let her keep going. "Chloe is a sweet girl," she said, and the word sweet landed the way it always does when it's used about a child in an academic conversation, as a consolation prize, a way of saying something kind before saying something that isn't. But I have to be honest with you, Miss Scott. Academically, she's struggling in ways that concern me. The reading group reassignment was something I did because I genuinely believe she needs more support at a foundational level before she can progress. "What assessment did you use to make that decision?" I asked. She paused, just a half second, but I caught it. "It was an ongoing observational assessment, my professional judgment based on her daily performance." "And when was the last formal assessment you conducted on Chloe's reading level?" Another pause, slightly longer. "I do holistic evaluation throughout the term." I nodded. I wrote something in my notebook slowly so she could see me writing. I did not tell her what I was writing. She watched my pen move. "Miss Scott," she said, and her tone shifted very slightly, "I understand this is difficult to hear, but sometimes the most compassionate thing we can do for a child is to be realistic about where they are." That word, realistic, is one I have heard directed at me before. My mother used it when I told her I was going into property management instead of finishing the nursing program she had decided I was going to finish. My ex-husband's mother used it when I said I intended to buy a house on my own after the separation. It has never once been used to expand anyone's possibilities. It has only ever been used to shrink them. "I want to ask you something," I said. My voice was completely even. And I want you to take a moment before you answer. She waited. Do you believe Chloe is capable of performing at grade level? She smiled, that smile that didn't reach her eyes. I believe Chloe is doing her best. That's not what I asked. She set her tea down very carefully. Ms. Scott, I've been teaching for 19 years. I know how to read a student's potential. Based on what exactly? Her hand moved toward the manila folder. I have documentation here of Chloe's performance across the term. I'd like to see that documentation, I said. In a moment, first I'd like to play something for you. I watched her face change, not dramatically, just a small tightening around the eyes, the kind you see on someone who has just heard a sound they didn't expect. I took out my phone, I set it on the desk between us, and I pressed play. The recording lasted 4 minutes and 22 seconds. For the first 90 seconds, it was ambient classroom noise, chairs scraping, the muffled sound of children in the hallway, the distant bell marking the end of afternoon passing period. Ms. Bloom's voice came through clearly when she answered her phone because she was standing near the window where Chloe's desk was closest to the heating vent, and the vent had apparently been acting as an accidental amplifier all semester. Yes, I know, Ms. Bloom said into her phone. Her voice was different, looser. The careful professional cadence was gone. No, the conference is Thursday. The mother. A pause, I don't know. One of those parents who thinks their kid is special because they smile a lot. Another pause longer. I give better grades to the kids who are actually going somewhere. You can tell, you can just tell by looking at them which ones have it and which ones are going to be a problem for the next 9 years. She laughed at something the other person said. Then, honestly, I moved her down because I wanted the reading group balanced. She slows everyone else down. I'll document it properly, but the decision was already made. The recording ended 40 seconds after that. Chloe had stopped it when Ms. Bloom left the window area. I let the silence sit for exactly 4 seconds after the audio cut off. Ms. Bloom's hand had gone to her collarbone. She pressed her fingers flat against it like she was checking for a pulse. Her voice came out wrong. She cleared her throat. Where did you get that? My daughter recorded it. She was at her desk. She is lawfully present in this classroom every school day, Ms. Bloom. That is not, you can't just. She stopped, tried again. That recording is taken out of context. I opened my notebook to the page I had been building since October. I have documentation going back to the beginning of the term. The open house in October, when Chloe's work was not displayed despite every other student having at least one piece up. The reading group reassignment on October 29th, which you told Chloe was, for her own good, without any formal assessment. And the comment you made to me this evening, your daughter is just not smart enough for this level, which I will be including in my formal grievance to the district equity office. Her fingers pressed harder against her collarbone. A grievance? You're filing a grievance. I've already spoken with the district family advocacy line and with an education law attorney named Catherine Delacroix. Catherine is reachable by phone right now, if you'd like to speak with her. Ms. Bloom pushed back from her desk and stood up, which I think was a reflex, the body's attempt to reclaim height advantage when the conversation has stopped going the way it was planned. But standing didn't help her. She looked at the phone on the desk between us and then looked away from it, toward the construction paper leaves on the bulletin board, as if they might offer something useful. I have been teaching for 19 years, she said finally, quieter now. I know, and I imagine the district's equity coordinator will want to discuss how many other students were reassigned to lower groups based on decisions that were made before the documentation was created. That landed. I watched it land. Her hand dropped from her collarbone. She looked at me with something that wasn't anger anymore. It was the particular expression of someone who has just understood the full shape of what is in front of them. I gathered my notebook. I picked up my phone. I stood. I'm going to ask that Chloe be returned to her original reading group by Monday, I said. I'm also going to ask that her previous assessments be reviewed by a neutral third party before any further academic placement decisions are made. Catherine will be sending a formal letter to the principal and to the district superintendent's office by 9 tomorrow morning. If the school would like to resolve this internally and quickly, I'd suggest they begin that process before the letter arrives. Ms. Bloom sat back down. Not deliberately, her knees just seemed to make the decision for her. I walked out of that classroom at 4:47 in the afternoon, into the hallway that smelled like floor wax and old crayon, and I called Catherine Delacroix before I reached the parking lot. File everything, I said. We're going with the original timeline. Already drafting, Catherine said. How did she take it? About how you'd expect. I sat in my car and called James at the after-school program and told him I was on my way to get Chloe. Then I sat for 1 more minute, with my hands in my lap, and let out the breath I had been holding for 6 weeks. The letter arrived at the principal's office at 9:14 the following morning. I know this because the principal, a man named Howard Delgado, called me at 9:37 and asked if I could come in that afternoon. His voice had the specific quality of someone who has just received information that rearranged their entire day. I went in at 2 o'clock. Catherine attended by speakerphone. Howard sat across from me with the letter printed out and a yellow legal pad he kept looking at without writing on. He told me the district took equity concerns extremely seriously. He told me they had an established review process. He told me he wanted to assure me that Chloe's academic placement would be reevaluated by a certified reading specialist no later than the following Wednesday. I told him I appreciated that, and that Catherine would be following up in writing to confirm the timeline. Then I asked one specific question. I asked whether the district had any record of prior complaints against Ms. Bloom involving similar concerns about academic placement decisions. Howard looked at his yellow legal pad for a long moment. He wrote something on it slowly. Then he said he wasn't in a position to discuss personnel matters in that format, which was, in its way, an answer. The certified reading specialist assessed Chloe the following Wednesday. She placed her at the 91st percentile for reading comprehension at her grade level and recommended she be considered for the advanced literacy elective offered in fourth grade. The report used language like advanced inferential reasoning and above-average thematic analysis. I kept a copy of that report. I still have it. Chloe drew a small star on the corner of her copy when I showed it to her. Does this mean I go back to the other reading group? She asked. Yes, she thought about this. Okay, can we have tacos tonight? We had tacos. Catherine filed the formal equity grievance the following Monday, after the reading specialist's report was issued. The grievance cited the recording, my documented timeline, the pattern of selective academic display at the open house, the undocumented reading group reassignment, and the results of the independent assessment. Sandra Fuentesware, the district equity coordinator, opened a formal investigation 4 days after receiving it. I am going to be honest about what came next because I think it matters. The investigation took 6 weeks. It was not fast and it was not clean, and there were 2 phone calls during that period where I sat in my kitchen after Chloe was in bed and thought about stopping. Not because I doubted the evidence, because these processes grind on you. They make you produce the same documentation 6 different ways. They make you re-explain things to people who are reading the file for the first time while you have been living with it for months. There were 2 school board members who sent letters suggesting the matter could be resolved with a simple placement correction and a formal apology. Catherine's response to that letter was 4 pages long and included the phrase pattern and practice, which has a specific legal meaning I had not known about before this year, and which I now know very well. The investigation concluded in January. The findings were not made entirely public, because personnel decisions are protected, but what I was told is this. The Equity Office found sufficient evidence of differential academic treatment based on factors outside measurable academic performance. The district recommended a corrective action plan. Ms. Renata Bloom was placed on administrative leave at the beginning of the spring semester, pending a formal review by the school board. She did not return to Millbrook Elementary after that leave began. By March, she had resigned. I did not celebrate when Catherine told me. I was in my car in the parking garage at work, and I listened to Catherine explain the outcome, and then I thanked her and hung up and sat there for a moment. I felt tired in the specific way you feel tired when something you have been carrying for a long time is finally set down. Not relief exactly. More like the absence of a weight you had gotten so used to that you almost forgot it was there. Chloe's new teacher is a woman named Ms. Anita Ferreira, who has been at Millbrook for 7 years and who, within the first 2 weeks of the spring semester, put Chloe's work on the display board twice. I noticed on the second week that Chloe had started raising her hand in class again. She had stopped doing that in October. There is one more thing I want to tell you, because it is the part that made everything feel real. 3 weeks after the resignation was confirmed, I got a call from another parent at Millbrook. A woman named Deb, whose son had been in Ms. Bloom's class the year before. She had been following the situation, quietly, the way parents do when they are watching something unfold and trying to decide whether to speak. She told me her son had been in the lower reading group for his entire third grade year. He had tested 2 grade levels behind when he entered fourth grade. They had spent the summer and most of fall working with a private reading tutor, which had cost their family $11,000 out of pocket. She said she had always felt something was wrong but had not known how to name it. She had not had a recording. She had not known about the equity office. She had not known about Catherine Delacroix. I gave her Catherine's number. I gave her Sandra Fuentesware's direct line. I told her to document everything she still had and to start from there. I do not know what Deb's case will produce. I do know that at least two other families have now filed their own equity complaints with the district, citing the findings in the investigation that began with my grievance. What those families do with that process is their own story to tell. Mine ends here, in a reasonably ordinary Tuesday evening in March, with Chloe at the kitchen table doing her homework for a class where her teacher believes in her, with the $67,000 in her college fund sitting exactly where it has always been, quiet and patient and growing, and with my notebook from last fall filed in the cabinet where I keep things I hope never to need again but will not throw away. My daughter asked me last week if Ms. Bloom was coming back. I said no. She said, good, and went back to her homework. She didn't ask anything else. At 9 years old, she had already figured out that some chapters just end and the next one is more interesting. I think she's right, so I'll ask you this. When my 9-year-old pressed play on that recording, was that too far or exactly far enough? Tell me what you think in the comments.